Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of The Pulse. I'm Doug Lyons, editorial writer for the Palm Beach Post. And once again, I have the pleasure of being joined by James Call and John Kennedy, two of our finest USA Today correspondents in Florida, and we're covering the Florida legislature. Let me start with I got to admit, I was wrong. I thought this was going to be a dull election year session of the legislature, and I couldn't have been more wrong. So let me just start it off by asking, has the session gone the way that you guys have seen it? You're closer to it than I am. But is this something that you expected, or have there been surprises?
Well, I think it is a unique session, Doug, in the sense that we who've been here for quite a while covering legislature, in past years when you had an election year session, which we are in right now, there was often the feeling that an election year session, lawmakers are reluctant to get into areas that are considered divisive, polarizing, controversial, because they know that they're going to go before voters later in the year, and they want to sort of have a relatively tame session. Now, admittedly, sometimes we've seen through the legislature, the Florida House can be a little bit more of a strident body, going forward with some issues. We've often seen years where the House maybe proposed some of the more, remarkable controversial bills during a session, but they all seem to fade in the Senate. The Senate toned them down, killed them, ignored them. This year, however, we are seeing both the House and Senate moving very forward on a lot of legislation that would be considered pretty divided in this divided state of Florida. We're going to talk more about it, but we've seen legislation that would regulate how race is taught in schools. It would allow the opportunity to, in the workplace, for employees to potentially sue an employer because they didn't like the way the diversity program was presented, or that they felt singled out by topics that were discussed. We're seeing the much talked about "Don't Say Gay" bill that is advancing in the House and Senate now. So, and of course, not even to mention we have a new restriction on abortion in Florida that is about to become law, undoubtedly, that would restrict from 24 weeks to 15 weeks the number of weeks of pregnancy that an abortion that an abortion could be done. So that is a remarkable decades-long change that in state law. So there's some wild stuff out there. I think you're seeing the ruling Republican Party in the legislature really appealing to a base that wants these kind of out there issues, how they're going to play when they go before voters, legislators that that are not exclusively part of their base. We're going to have to wait till November to find out the results of how this legislation plays before voters. But that's the kind of year it's been. It's a very atypical election year.
James, that's an understatement. George F. Will wasn't talking about the Florida legislature when he wrote this last week, but he said contemporary politics, which is simultaneously sinister and silly, can leave you in tears or in stitches. And that basically sums up the Florida House. This has been unlike any other session I've covered, and I've been in town since the mid-1980s. This is a Lord of the Flies session. This is policy making that you would expect from a group of adolescents. It's like, we have power. Who can we attack? They targeted women. They targeted minorities. They targeted workers. This is a vindictive session. This is something that I've never seen, and I never expected from the Florida legislature.
I'm going to switch gears for a minute and ask you. I mean, Florida's a growing state. We're the third largest state. We've got some real life issues. What, in your view, has not been addressed that should be addressed out of this legislature?
Well, one of the things. Oh, go ahead, James.
Well, one thing is water. We have a clean water crisis in Florida. We have pediatricians telling parents, and we have veterinarians telling dog owners, don't let your dogs go into the streams or springs or lakes because they're too polluted. There's something like 20,000 people on the Agency for Peoples with Disabilities list for developmental care. These are the most vulnerable and the sickest people among us. And there are 20,000 individuals waiting for care that the state apparently does not have money to take care of. And some of these folks, something like 30 or 40% of these folks have been on that waiting list, that APD waiting list, for a decade. We have an affordable housing crisis. We have a property insurance crisis going on right now. Thousands of homeowners losing their property insurance for their homes because of the insurance crisis. And these are the issues that I think that affect people on a daily basis and include the most vulnerable among us, that are just simply being ignored to score these partisan points in the culture wars.
James, let me ask you a quick question on that housing issue, because I have a question from Rick Christie of the Palm Beach Post, and he's kind of concerned about housing. As we can see in South Florida, rents and mortgages are just sky high. And he wonders, why isn't this more of a political issue? What's your answer to
that? This is sort of like a conversation that I've been having with Representative Evan Jenny, the House Democratic leader. And Jenny puts it this way: is anyone paying attention? That's the other thing that is unusual about this session. When you look at the redistricting controversy that's playing out, when you look at the Don't Say Gay bill, which is really a public education bill, this is an attack on teachers. It's not only an attack on gender identity politics, but it's also, you are censoring a teacher. You are chilling the speech of a teacher. And then the abortion issue itself. Why there are not, and don't get me started about the labor issues. Why there are not more people at the Florida Capitol protesting and keeping an eye on these lawmakers is beyond me. The question really is, and this is Representative Jenny's question, is anyone in Florida paying attention?
John, I'm going to get back to that question I asked James. What other issues do you see that should be addressed, but really, it's been passed over by the legislature at this point?
Well, I don't really have too many other ones than what James pointed out. I mean, these waiting lists that the state has had for years for public services. The Agency for Persons with Disabilities is one that is very prominent, that always has thousands of people awaiting services. There's also community care for the elderly. There's Alzheimer's home care programs. Those have endless waiting lists, and the state legislature is on track to probably follow what Governor DeSantis is recommending, and they're going to put about maybe $15 billion in reserves. The state is awash in money right now, largely because a lot of federal money is also flowing into Florida, and the state's economy is doing pretty well, all told. So they have the kind of money that they could really answer some real problems this year. And they don't seem to want to take steps toward that. Affordable housing is the topic that is on the minds of many voters right now. I mean, anyone that owns a house right now is thinking they're sitting on a gold mine, that's going up in value. But at the same time, if they tried to sell it, they'd never be able to afford another house. So they're sort of trapped in their current situation. And this is a state that it's nothing new, or it's nothing that notable to say we're a state of haves and have-nots. And the have-nots in this state really are largely bypassed by the interests of the Florida legislature. There's not much reach out that they're looking to do. It follows in that the Republican Party in the state does not want a large government and does not want government, subsidies or anything like that. On affordable housing, there could be a lot more money put into trying to stabilize rents, trying to make home ownership a little bit more real for people, that they could somehow tap some state reserves or state money to get down payment assistance. Those are the kind of things that the legislature could proactively do. And, it's just not on the table. They are putting some money into the conventional affordable housing efforts that the state has had that provide some money to counties. But even that's a little bit of a dispute between the House and Senate right now, because the House is not going along with anything with rental assistance. So, kind of like, go figure, that is an issue that you would think does course through that Republican voting base as well. They're affected by it as well. But the legislature does not seem to want to really address it. I guess, maybe will the market take care of it? Rising interest rates will ease affordable housing over the next year. It's possible, but there could be more done right now to sort of help people that can't afford rent anymore. That's a very common story across Florida.
Yeah. Well, let me step back out of the real world and back into the legislative session. One thing that has not surprised any of us is the governor's imprint on what his priorities are and what he wants to become law. There's so much going on, but I'm just want to ask you guys what particular issues that really just kind of stand out for you as far as the governor's priorities.
One of the issues that really surprised me was that the governor involved himself in the redistricting issue. I didn't see that coming, but I guess it plays to the script of he's the leading fighter in the culture war, and he's playing to that base of the Republican Party that supports, he's playing to the Trump base of the Republican Party, and this fits right in with it.
And the governor also right now, is playing sort of on a larger stage as well. He's trying to appeal to Republicans nationally and burnish his reputation because, as we've seen, we just had the Conservative Political Action Committee conference, that was going on in Orlando the last few days.
Hey, Jane,
and it seemed to be something that DeSantis has gotten. He's the number 2 favorite behind President Trump, former President Trump, for running for the White House in 2024. So DeSantis knows that, and DeSantis knows how he can really, through policy in Florida, get attention with Republicans nationally. So we've seen the governor come up with an elections package that would create a security force in the state to investigate what would be allegations of election fraud, which DeSantis himself in 2020 was crowing about how well the state of Florida did with its presidential election and the results, getting them out efficiently, no real problems at polling places. So the governor has weighed in on that, which is all part of the Trump base talk of how Trump was robbed of the 2020 presidential campaign because of election fraud. So it addresses some of that audience. And then, when it comes to the whole Stop Woke Act, which the governor introduced, that's another thing that has great appeal to the right. And that's the legislation that I had alluded to at the top of our show, where you're seeing the governor trying to limit how race is discussed in classrooms and also in the workplace. It raises questions about how in the classroom, any discussion of the past of slavery, of the Holocaust, it can color that. It's a chilling effect for Florida teachers. Again, as James pointed out, a lot of this is directed at real world application in the classroom. And the other thing that's unique about that Stop Woke Act is that it would reach into workplaces, and it would create a situation where if somebody felt that they were singled out because they were, a white male in the workplace, and that the company was devoted to diversity training and trying to have more gender equity in the workplace, if they felt offended by some of that, possibly they could have a civil rights violation lawsuit in their favor. Civil rights protections we've always thought about as trying to protect potentially endangered minorities in the workplace. This would be so twisted that it would protect the majorities. So it's a kind of through the looking glass kind of situation right now in Tallahassee. But the governor is feasting on this, and he's getting a lot of attention nationally for it.
Yeah, the use of language is it's fascinating. This, on the one hand, this session has been fascinating by the rhetoric of the ruling Republican Party, and I think what is going on. Marco Rubio, Senator Rubio, sort of like told us what was going on in his speech at CPAC this past weekend when he said there are people who may not agree with us on taxes, regulations, and a variety of issues, but they are really angry, and that is what the Republicans are doing. Or that is the governor's game plan. Instead of addressing the issues that face the state, we are picking fights about abortion rights. We are picking fights about our racial history, and we are handcuffing teachers in the classroom and local governments when they try to pass ordinances that offend businesses. The governor is leading by dividing and fomenting anger.
Let me talk about education for a minute, since that anti-woke legislation is impacting schools so deeply. John Torres of Florida Today raises a question. He wants to know, what are educators to do if this bill becomes a law? How are they supposed to teach history that some might find offensive?
Well, I think they're going to have to be brave. They're going to have to hope that they are in a school district where they have a supportive superintendent, their own personal, reporting line, who they have to report to also is supportive of them. But because a lot of this, is going to be in the eye of the beholder when it comes to if a parent gets mad because they think that their kid had gotten a lesson from a teacher that maybe the kid came home and he felt sort of like, I'm a white person and I felt like that discussion of slavery made me feel guilty because, I'm privileged, or my ancestors played a role in oppressing Black people in the state. If that kid feels discomfort, that parent would have the authority to raise a complaint with that teacher's superintendent or, administrators of some kind. And that's just a bad situation to kind of create that atmosphere where it really chills discussion in classroom. I mean, what are we afraid of? But this legislation seems to be designed to try to really, put guardrails on what is discussed in school. And I think, as a parent, I don't think I want that to happen, but I guess there are parents out there that see educators as being from a little bit of a different cultural world than they are, and they don't want their student exposed to some of the ideas that a teacher may convey to them. So, let's regulate that speech. That's a dangerous thing.
I'm a little confused about what appears to be a war on public education.
That's what it is.
There's legislation out here that talks about turning school boards into partisan posts, and at the same time, there's another bill talking about making it a volunteer position as opposed to a paid position. What's the party got against public education?
It's vulnerable. Public schools are vulnerable, and they, the Florida House does not talk about public education. The Florida House talks about government schools, and the legislature has spent 20 years, 2 decades, weakening public schools and attacking the public school industry and fostering an alternative system, the charter school system, and public schools are weak. And so they're a target. That's the only thing I can figure.
Well, the other thing that this grows out of too, we can't ignore is the pandemic. We've gone through a couple of years now of mask policies in school that the governor has been opposed to generally. And, this year we're seeing the House in its budget is promoting the idea of penalizing 12 counties, 12 school districts and counties of $200 million total from in state funds, because these 12 counties enacted mask policies that differed from what the governor wanted. So, these rebellion counties now are being held accountable for not following the governor's executive order. That was, of course, challenged by parents. It was challenged by school districts. It went through courts. Florida did not really pass a law banning mandatory masks in school until the fall. Yet a lot of these actions that the school districts did back in springtime and into the early stages of the school year, they're now being punished for. So a lot of this, frustration that parents were frustrated with the schools, but I think they were generally supportive of the way schools were able to carry on with different restrictions during the height of the pandemic. And there was a reason for the kind of policies that they enacted. But from DeSantis' point of view, again, that playing to that anti-mask, that wary of vaccination population that's out there, DeSantis has the bully pulpit, and he is coming down hard on these districts, and you're seeing it now manifested in the Florida House. So I think a lot of this other legislation, whether it be regulating race discussions in school or how sexual identity and gender is discussed in schools as well, is sort of an outgrowth of that clash that we have had over masks over the past 2 years. I think a lot of Republicans viewed school boards as being out of step with their people, out of step with their Republican voters, and I think that's what we're seeing as a backlash right now. And even it comes down into that point that you made, Doug, a moment ago about the partisan school board idea, the idea that school board members who run nonpartisan in Florida, that they should run as a Republican or a Democrat. I think that comes out of that too, because I think you saw some of these 12 counties that defied DeSantis on masks. Some of those are in counties that are Republican leaning, but somehow they had a school board that, defied the Republican governor. So I think now you're trying to get it where there's the view that if you're going to vote for a school board member, you're going to know if he's a Republican or a Democrat or not.
And I'd just like to add with on the education thing is that, COVID, I mean, the schools, they got caught up in the culture wars issue. I mean, the governor is opposed to, Joe Biden's COVID policies, and that all got tied up into that. But, nowhere in Florida is critical race theory being taught in public schools. And so, but it became a big issue, with the woke act. And, it's just, it's one of these distraction issues. And you could also argue that the same thing with the Don't Say Gay bill, what the House Republicans were saying that they were fighting against and what they were trying to prevent. Somehow justification for that bill came down to apparently fear that first graders were being instructed on sexual intercourse, in comments that House members made after the vote. So the Florida legislature has spent more than 2 decades attacking the public school system, and it really got supercharged this year.
Let me ask you guys, there are a whole bunch of measures about what can be subject of instruction, whether it's race, gender identity. I even got a note from the TC Palm. There's a question about some legislation involving communism. But, of all these measures that are sailing through the legislature, which ones do you expect will actually make it to the governor's desk?
Oh, I think they all will.
Wow.
I think every one of them. This legislature is very adherent to the governor, and they are not going to buck him on virtually anything, I think, at this point. So everything that you're hearing out there is going to become Florida law, I think, in the next couple of months. July 1st is when most new laws take effect, and that's when you're going to start seeing some of these changes in the in the schools.
Wow.
Yeah.
This raises another question. Whatever happened to the Republican Party that used to take home rule seriously? We got a question from John Torres. Is like, he's just curious as to what happened to that GOP party.
Yeah, well, I think when we've seen home rule defy the Republican legislature with different initiatives that are taking place in municipalities, that's what got the attention of the Republican legislature. They don't want that anymore. They want to be able to command what Floridians are dealing with, not just on a statewide level, but in their individual communities as well. The other thing too, this gets into sort of the political science of things, but you have seen more urban areas in Florida becoming kind of Democratic enclaves. They're a little bit more liberal leaders who are a little more quick to respond with innovative ideas, maybe ideas that this Republican legislature does not want to have happening. So I think it's a little bit of a pushback too against communities that are seen as Democratic leaning now. We have a little bit of a self-sorting across the country where you have urban areas are more traditionally, kind of more progressive, liberal leaning areas. And that's not exclusive to Florida, but we're seeing it here in the Miamis, the Tampas, the Orlandos. Voters there are a little more tolerant of government playing a larger role and enacting policies that this Republican legislature doesn't like. So I think that's where you start seeing home rule being taken away.
Yeah, there are two things that play here, and it's within the Republican Party. On the one hand, the Republican Party, part of the Republican Party is very focused on capital and on business. Governor Rick Scott used to say, former Governor Rick Scott used to say, capital flows to where capital is welcome. And he was intent on making Florida the most hospitable state in the union for capital. Mm-hmm. So you have that faction of the Republican Party, and those are the ones handcuffing. That's the faction that's handcuffing local government with preemptions to make it easier for businesses to operate. And then on the other hand, on the other side of the Republican Party is the cultural conservatives who are ramping up all these other different issues that, the abortion bill, the Anti-Woke Act, the redistricting battle, the fight against solar power, and else. So that's the tension within the Republican Party. The cultural conservatives are not interested in home rule and preemption and pay no attention to what's going on there. And the part of the party that's interested in that, the business section of the party, cheers on the lawmakers and even writes the bills for them that get submitted. So, that's the dynamics at play.
James, you mentioned a topic I wanted to bring up. Is Florida in danger of losing its solar power initiatives with this bill that's going through, that's being backed by the utilities? I mean, the critics are really worried about it, about the effect that
this topic came up last week. I was down in on another story working, and it came up among the people I was talking to that had nothing to do with it, and the gentleman that I was talking to was telling me that if this bill would go through and become law, that he would have no incentive to put the solar panels on his house. Right now he pays a monthly charge to the utility company for when he's not using power that he generated, and so it would remove incentives to switch to solar power, is the argument.
When we were talking about home rule a moment ago, this is the ultimate home rule takeaway, because you have homeowners that have been, attempting to install solar energy panels on their roofs because of tax incentives that the state is offering. Florida Power and Light is a big driver behind this effort to kind of keep the company's control of solar energy as it develops in Florida, and it doesn't really want competition from individual homeowners around the state. So I think that's part of what we're seeing evolve into this so-called net metering bill that is getting so much attention right now.
And it's moving through the House with a lot of support. I mean, 3 committee meetings and it's been approved 39-13. The opposition doesn't seem to be making an effective case against it.
You know, we talk about
it goes back to what you were saying earlier. I mean, it's like these things are going on, and so the people of Florida apparently are okay with how things are in the direction we're headed in.
You know, we talk about the cultural conservatives. I'm going to, since we picked on FP&L, let's pick on some of the other influential, lack of a better word, interest groups up there in Tallahassee that are moving legislation behind the scenes. We mentioned FP&L. Any others we should be on the lookout for?
Well, there's tax breaks that are going through largely on corporate income reporting by state corporations, and that benefits some of the largest corporate holders in the state. The Disney's, the FP&Ls, and beyond, and those are moving. Beyond that, individual companies, there's a number of like in affordable housing. There's some efforts by a development company in the Jacksonville area to try to craft legislation that would increase the likelihood that developers of affordable housing can walk away with from the affordable side of the housing and just do a development over the course of several years. It's a little bit of a complex tax incentive that would be diminished because of the actions of a company called Vestcor, which is involved in development across the state, but they're Jacksonville based. So there's some of those going on, but every legislative session is chock full of quiet legislation that is incentivizing somebody over somebody else. There's a lot of trade show that happens in the fourth floor of the Florida Capitol. Those kind of issues, a lot of those are still kind of to be decided in the session's closing couple of weeks. So I haven't quite seen them whether they're all going to make it across the finish line or not right now.
Yeah. James, you see any surprises coming out of the budget? I mean, I know that's still
coming out of the budget.
Yeah, I know it's still in flux.
Well, there's a $3 billion difference at the moment, so that there could be a lot of surprises. The other thing I'd like to mention, I think that we have to keep in mind is what's going on in the Ukraine and in the international situation. We've never been here before, with an invasion of this type in a digital era, and how former President Trump is behaving. I mean, I don't know if these are uncertain times that we're in, and the House Democrats were really excited that seven Republicans, flipped on the Don't Say Gay bill. And then there were 2 Republicans who flipped on the redistricting bill. And Mitt Romney is out there, lecturing Republicans on patriotism. So, maybe things are about to change in this environment that we're in at the moment.
Well, one thing that's kind of tied to that I'm kind of curious about, we're going to see in the next couple of weeks in the budget negotiations between the House and Senate as they emerge in the home stretch of the legislature. We have not yet seen what Governor DeSantis wanted, which was a $1 billion cut in the state gas tax. It was going to be like a 25 cent a gallon cut in gas tax. beginning in July and lasting for 5 months. So it would carry through the November election, which, from a political point of view, it was seen as something that DeSantis could campaign on, to $1 billion gas tax cut. Now, of course, that idea was promoted well before the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the uncertainty that we have right now with gas prices going forward. That also, the idea of cutting the gas tax nationally is also being discussed in Congress. So it's almost like I'll be curious to see whether that idea reemerges because in Florida, because it's a little bit uncertain now of its potential, I guess, as a break for Floridians. If gas prices are going to go up to $4.25 a gallon, if you get a 25-cent break in Florida and you're still paying $4 a gallon for gas, I'm not sure if DeSantis can point to that and say, look at the great, benefit I've given you. So I don't know. There's a little bit of a push and pull on that. The Republican leaders of the House and Senate have also diminished the idea of doing the gas tax because they feel that it's going to be spread around too far, that too many out-of-staters are going to benefit from it in Florida. So why give Florida money, purportedly Florida money? It's mostly American Rescue Plan dollars that would be going into this gas tax break. But the question is, I guess, whether it still has the same sort of political resonance that it had prior to the invasion of Ukraine, I think.
And it's notable that was a tax cut that the legislature didn't embrace, which is another sign that, questioning whether the Republican Party is marching in lockstep and whether the vindictiveness of some of these bills this session will make it all the way through.
You guys raise a good point. We often focus on the governor, but there is the Senate president and the Speaker of the House who have some influence in it. With Wilton Simpson, I think I've seen maybe I'm making too much out of it, but I've seen a little bit of pushback on a couple of issues where he isn't quite marching in lockstep with Governor DeSantis. Did I read that wrong, or is there some signs of, or are there any signs where the Speaker and the Senate president are actually exerting some of their influence?
Well, that was primarily in an environmental bill where U.S. Sugar and other sugar growers were pushing hard to get some language in state law that would guarantee water users the kind of water quantity levels that they've accustomed to, even as Lake Okeechobee drawdowns were needed during high water points in South Florida. Simpson went to bat for the sugar industry and was supportive of legislation that Governor DeSantis has had an awkward relationship with sugar ever since his days in Congress. He was an opponent of federal price supports for the sugar industry. And sugar was a big backer of his Republican primary rival in 2018. That was Agriculture Commissioner Adam Putnam, who ultimately was defeated by DeSantis. DeSantis, though, is happy to take sugar contributions to his political committee, but he will defy sugar every now and again. And in this case, DeSantis sided with the environmental community that was not wanting this kind of language tucked into the budget for sugar. And in the end, Simpson had to back away from what he wanted done. Of course, it was portrayed as all a misunderstanding of what the amendment that Simpson was backing was going to do. Simpson made the case that it was not going to really endanger some of the environmental efforts that are being done to try to ease pollution, red tide, blue-green algae in South Florida waters. But anyway, that was a point of clash between DeSantis and Simpson. However, Simpson is a candidate for statewide office this year. He's running for agriculture commissioner. He is going to want to grab onto the coattails of Ron DeSantis. So you're not going to see that kind of friction very often between those two.
Okay. Well, we're coming to the end of the road here as far as time, but I did have one last question. It seems that most of the polls that have been taken since the session started have shown that majority of Floridians aren't buying some of these red meat bills that have been sailing through the legislature. It seemed to be priorities coming out of Tallahassee. My question is, and I guess I've raised it before, but when do you think we'll start seeing any type of real pushback?
That's an excellent question in the sense that with the abortion bill, and the redistricting shenanigans, I would have thought that would have generated the pushback, but it hasn't. And so obviously people either are not paying attention or they're just not focused on it at the moment. And maybe these issues get discussed during the summer leading up to the fall campaign. I don't know. It's bewildering to me. I don't have an answer.
I guess what you need is, for these issues to become more explosive, I guess, on a political stage, you need them to their manifestation in the classroom. You have to have some examples of talk of teachers being, disciplined for discussing slavery or something like that in classroom. Some topic that I don't mean this to diminish that awful period in American history, but what is kind of a routine discussion suddenly becoming the stuff of a teacher being disciplined for discussing it, or the same with sex and gender identity, or are people going to react to it in some way? But in the end, it's going to be also can Democrats exploit these issues on the campaign trail and point to the Republican legislature as being out of step with the will and the needs of Floridians. Whether the Democrats can do that, they do not have a very good track record in this state for being able to stand up to Republican leadership. There is a good chance this year, if the election goes as the way polls are looking right now, that Florida could have every statewide elected official being a Republican. That would be the first time in modern memory that Florida is an entirely Republican-led state. So, the Democrats, you got to beat somebody with somebody. So they're going to have a candidate that can take on DeSantis. There are three prominent Democrats running right now, but none of them are really catching fire, and none of them are looking well positioned to defeat DeSantis. And the same at the cabinet level. You're seeing the Democrats struggling to even field candidates to run against cabinet officers that are up for election or re-election this year. So how it all shakes out in election time, I don't know.
Doug, let me put it to you this way.
All right.
This has been a session where geared for a re-election campaign. Everybody in Tallahassee, every seat in Tallahassee is on the fall ballot. So this is an election year session, and the decision was made to fire up the base. And they fired up the base with a list of grievances. So they went after the women, they went after the minorities, they're going after the workers, the workforce. They've attacked the school system. This is their game plan to fire up the base. Can they keep up this anger through November? This is very hard to keep people mad for that long period of time. And they are running out of people to target. I mean, who else can they target? Okay, so is this strategy sustainable? Now, the governor obviously and the Republican leaders obviously think that this is a sustainable strategy. We'll see.
Well, James, you know the old saying, be careful what you ask for. We might get it. It would be interesting, fellas, if we could get back together maybe before, maybe after the session, just to kind of see what actually did make it out of there, and to talk about, the upcoming campaign and see what type of impact it would have. As always, I appreciate your time in this pulse, and I guess we'll just make this a wrap. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you,
Talk
Doug.
soon.
Thank you.